Well, what a difference a day makes. Today's tariff saga began with the U.S. president doubling his steel and aluminum tariff threats to 50%. He lashed out at Ontario's surcharge on electricity to the U.S., saying, "Can you imagine Canada stooping so low as to use electricity that so affects the life of innocent people as a bargaining chip and threat?" He added, they, Canada, will pay a financial price for this so big that it will be read about in history books for many years to come. But then Ontario's premier dropped his electricity tax, and the White House has just now released a statement that says steel and aluminum tariffs are back to 25%. In the middle of all of this, Canada's finance minister responded. The government of Canada has been clear on this issue since the beginning. Should the United States move forward tomorrow with the imposition of tariffs on Canadian products, including steel and aluminum, we will be ready to respond firmly and proportionately. Joining me now is the Minister of Labour, Stephen McKinnon. So, Minister, that was a day. How was your day on dealing with the Canada-U.S. situation?
I call it the bouncing ball, David. The government of Canada has always taken the view, you saw Mr. LeBlanc's statement, the government of Canada has always taken the view that once the U.S. sends us something official, we will retaliate. We will retaliate in a corresponding way, and we will inflict harm, economic harm on the U.S. in so doing. This is not a good idea. These tariffs are unwise. They're unjustified. They go against our free trade agreement that this current president signed with Canada. And Canadians are not going to take this lying down.
The White House says we're back to the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum, and I know the response won't officially come until we see the piece of paper with the executive order, but this is a running back of what we saw in the first Trump presidency, right, where they did the national security tariffs on these same sectors, and the response was dollar for dollar, percent for percent. That feels like this is what's going to happen. Indeed.
Proportionate response, corresponding tariff. These are unjustified tariffs. Imagine, as it was back then, invoking national security for the aluminum used to make their fighter jets. Canada produces, for the U.S., I believe, 5 million tons of aluminum. The U.S.'s capacity, and confirmed by this, no less than the CEO of Alcoa, which is pretty capped, they have no room to grow their aluminum production, is about 800,000 tons. So the U.S. needs our aluminum. They need it for fighter jets, they need it for automobiles, they need it for Bud Light cans. And all of those things will increase by 25% in price. That will inflict economic harm on U.S. businesses, on U.S. consumers, and no one really understands why.
But the retaliation that we can expect from Canada on this, Minister, as I understand it, is directly on American steel and American aluminum. The pause on that second tranche of retaliatory tariffs that go back to the March 4th threats of $125 billion.
Hard to keep it all together.
It is. It's the tariff of the week club. But that stays paused. This would be new countermeasures specifically on those sectors.
Proportionate response. A mature response by a mature country, by a government that is considering all of its options and doing so in the interests of Canadians. And yes, we will do everything proportionately to the U.S., and that will inflict major harm on the U.S. economy.
Okay, so Doug Ford is going to go to Washington on Thursday to meet with Howard Lutnick, and Dominic LeBlanc, the finance minister, as we understand it, is going to be going with him. And Howard Lutnick posted something on his social media saying that this meeting will in part discuss a renewed USMCA in advance of the April 2nd tariff deadline on the reciprocal tariffs. Is this the start of a reopened negotiations? Because it's not supposed to happen until 2026. I know it's impossible to separate the issues, but is Thursday the beginning of negotiations, as Commerce Secretary Lutnick is implying here?
Again, the bouncing ball. But Canada, let us be very clear, we have among the best trade negotiators in the world. They are in constant contact with Canadian exporters, with Canadian businesses, with Canadian unions, we stand ready at all times to undertake trade negotiations. We're the only country with a trade agreement with all the other G7 countries in the world. We have some of the best trade negotiators in the world, and I know that if they're called upon to be deployed, they'll be deployed.
You talk about the bouncing ball. I mean, how do you even begin to have a trade negotiation with this chaos? How do you begin to have a federal election in this? I mean, what is Mark Carney walking into when he officially completes his transition into the role as Prime Minister of Canada?
Well, he's walking into and going to be the captain of a team that has been managing this all the way through, managing it in the way I just described, maturely, proportionately, in a very serious way, and making sure that Canadians understand all of the repercussions of what could occur. There will be pain. Tariff wars cause pain. They are a bad idea. Canada is against tariff wars. But Mr. Carney, what he does is he becomes the team captain of a heck of a team. And what a team captain. You know, someone who has been through fires, through the great financial crisis, through the Brexit crisis, through the architecture of the world financial system to avoid collapse. This is a person who has been tested repeatedly and who has shown his mettle, and couldn't happen at a better time.
But you know, he says he wants to focus on building the economy. He's going to be laser focused on growth and various phrases to that effect. How do you grow the Canadian economy when your closest neighbor and biggest trading partner is tanking the stock market and maybe forcing the continent into a recession?
You take the long view. I'm the Minister of Employment. We have to have a workforce strategy that makes sure we are in a position to do what Mr. Carney's eager to do, which is to build the kind of infrastructure we need, north and south, east and west, more importantly, trade-enabling infrastructure that you can build from in terms of ensuring the prosperity of future generations in Canada. We have capital through pension funds, through other sources, people who are eager to invest in Canada. We have the skills, we have the resources, and we have the ideas and the innovation here in Canada. We have all of the ingredients necessary for success. So when Mark Carney talks about these things, people take notice, because we have all of these ingredients now, in addition to a heck of a country where people look after each other, where we have healthcare and childcare, and we put a safety net under workers. This is what Mark Carney's vision is, and I know we look forward to putting it into action.
Well, you're also going to have to put it into an election, and just look at what happened today. You know, over the course of 8 hours, it started off with a series of threats and blusters, and we kind of ended up where we started. But, you know, the Premier of Ontario and the Finance Minister of Canada are on their way to Washington, D.C. on Thursday. Yes. How do you have an election?
That's
in
a
the
heck
middle
of a first line, by the way.
Yeah, but
you got Doug Ford, the power forward, and Dominic LeBlanc, who's a skilled playmaker. You know, this is a great team for Team Canada.
But this is just, you know, Tuesday. How do you have an election in the middle of what is happening right now with tariffs on, off, back on, back off, April 2nd coming? How do you have an election in the middle of this chaos?
Well, skilled ministers are going to remain in place. They, of course, remain ministers through an election. So should anything come up during an election campaign, whenever that occurs, then those ministers are able to respond, and will respond with, I'm sure, the full approbation and authority of Canadians.
Okay, I want to play you something that Donald Trump said today. We've heard the comments about the 51st state and annexation, but he riffed on it today in a very expansive way, standing next to Elon Musk in an event designed to boost Tesla stock from the lawn of the White House. But just have a listen to what Donald Trump said today.
Frankly, the way that gets solved is Canada should honestly become our 51st state. We wouldn't have a northern border problem. We wouldn't have a tariff problem. The people of Canada would pay much less tax. It makes a lot of sense. And by the way, when you take away that artificial line that looks like it was done with a ruler, and that's what it was. Some guy sat there years ago and they said, rah.
I mean, we know he's gone after the Treaty of 1908, the Columbia River Treaty, talking about this imaginary line. I mean, what do you make of what we just saw there from the president?
Well, as a Canadian, I find that hard to take from our closest ally. I know it doesn't represent the views of our American friends. I know it does not represent any kind of aspiration that's ever been put in front of Americans, and it's never going to happen. There will, and as you have, there will be, I know, in reaction to those and other comments, counter reaction from Canadians that makes us all proud and that the world has never seen. Canadians have stood up for themselves from coast to coast to coast and made clear what their views are about statements like that. And obviously, as a Canadian, I can only say, me too.
Because of these actions, though, and the tariff threats, Canadians are losing their jobs. We saw 70 jobs go at an aluminum plant in Quebec last week. I believe today it was 20 at Algoma. I mean, when we last spoke, you outlined your initial response. Will there be more coming for the steel and aluminum sectors, or do you think what you put on the table covers it? Because, well, who knows where this is going to go effective tomorrow, but do you think they need to do more for these specific sectors?
We won't hesitate to continue to monitor those situations. And of course, one job loss is too many. And indeed, this kind of uncertainty is hard. It makes it hard for business people to plan, makes it hard on workers. It's stressful for Canadians, stressful for Americans too. You've heard CEOs. I talked about the CEO of Alcoa, the CEO of Ford Motor Company, and the markets are reacting to this in ways that are not good economically for the United States. So these things are having an impact, a real impact on people's lives. Of course, we regret that. We will do everything. We will work 24/7 to save every possible Canadian job and build from there and create a prosperous and growing economy. That will happen. That I'm very optimistic about. But right now, this is harmful, and our government is going to be ready to respond to support businesses and to support workers who are affected.
But you know, in the short to medium term, if the tariffs do get implemented, whether it's tomorrow or April 2nd or whenever the new date is, and then there's countermeasures, you know, the analysis is that over the short to medium term, 3 to 6 months, it's a recession, right? It's 10% unemployment in Canada and very likely negative economic growth. It seems to be accelerating even faster than that in the United States, even without the tariffs, just because of the instability, the trillions wiped out of the stock market. I mean, trillions in the last month. Even if it doesn't get to a full-blown trade war, are you worried that what is happening in the U.S. can drag Canada into real economic decline and create a recession even without the trade war?
Well, I think that's simple math. You know, they run a deficit that far exceeds our own. They have an inflation rate that's still running relatively hot. And now, you know, by the president's own words, staring down the barrel of a recession. Of course, that's not good news for Canada. It's not good news for the world. And you would think they'd want to do something about that.
Okay, one last question. You said earlier that the way to get through an election in this chaos, and we think there will be an election call next week. If you have a clear date, feel free to spill the beans here. You say cabinet ministers would stay in place and continue to stay on the job. Do you know if you're staying in place? Do you know what's happening with the cabinet? Do you have anything? Do you think you'll be the Labour minister through this period of time?
That's up to Prime Minister designate Carney, and I'm going to let him make all of those announcements for himself. And I am the MP for Gatineau. It's the job that I value the most, and that will continue. And I'm intending to put my name on the ballot once again and ask for the support of my constituents.
That was a successful avoiding of a potential career-limiting answer. Labour Minister Stephen McKinnon, we appreciate you coming in, man. Thanks
so much, David.
Okay, let's bring in the CBC's Katie Simpson, because she's in Washington with the latest on all of this with the U.S.-Canada trade war. So, Katie, what's the latest from down there on where things stand?
The headline Canadians need to be aware of is that starting tomorrow, Donald Trump says he will impose 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. It's not just Canadian imports or Canadian exports that'll be hit by this tariff. It's all of the United States trading partners that, send steel and aluminum into the United States. The day appears at this point at 5:15 Eastern time to be sort of wrapping at the same place it started. Donald Trump had long threatened to put these tariffs in starting Wednesday. And then on social media around 10:15 this morning, Donald Trump put up a post really appearing to go after Ontario Premier Doug Ford, frustrated with one aspect of Canada's retaliation plan. Remember, Donald Trump imposed 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, he says, because of border security concerns. Some of those tariffs have been walked back. There are exemptions for the auto sector and for goods that are USMCA compliant. Some people are still being hit by it. It's still a thing there. As part of Canada's response, provinces have been taking different measures on their own accord. And one thing that Ontario Premier Doug Ford did was impose a 25% surcharge on energy going to 3 American states. Doug Ford held a news conference on Monday that got a lot of attention in the United States, where he said that if the United States escalates, he won't be afraid to turn the power off completely. That got the attention of Donald Trump. And according to White House press secretary, she specifically cited Doug Ford's comments, describing them as egregious, and sort of the reasoning and motivation behind why it is Donald Trump decided to increase that tariff to 50%. And then from there, we, of course, learned that Ontario Premier Doug Ford, it was not long after that event at the White House from the White House press secretary saying, listen, this is coming, and this is because of the energy surcharge. Short time later, we learned from Ontario Premier Doug Ford he's actually been quietly negotiating behind the scenes with U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and they agree that Doug Ford is allowed to come down to the White House for some meetings with Howard Lutnick to talk about the USMCA, to talk about trade. And for the moment, Doug Ford would suspend the energy surcharge. Donald Trump then held an event at the White House where he was promoting Tesla. We can get into that in a minute. And here's what Donald Trump then said.
Will you make a different decision now about the tariffs on Canada? Will you reduce it?
At that, but probably so, yeah. He was a gentleman.
Just to be clear, for the 50%, is that going to go into effect on Canada or no?
Which one?
The 50% tariffs?
I'll let you know about it. Yeah, okay. I'll let you. But I appreciated his call. I thought it was nice.
The he's talking about is Doug Ford. Clear as mud there, right? So a short time after that, the White House puts out a statement, which we, of course, were sent as well. And it says, essentially, after President Trump threatened to use his executive powers to retaliate with a colossal 50% tariff against Canada, it goes on to mention the Ontario Lutnick phone call. President Trump has once again used the leverage of the American economy, which is best and biggest in the world, to deliver a win for the American people. Pursuant to his previous executive order, a 25% tariff on steel and aluminum with no exceptions or exemptions will go into effect for Canada and all our other trading partners at midnight, March 12th. So Doug Ford pulled back or suspended the energy surcharge, and that was able to stop the 50% tariff that Donald Trump had threatened. But the original 25% tariff is still going ahead. Doug Ford announced that he does have some meetings with Howard Lutnick. Donald Trump showering compliments on Doug Ford in this moment. But at the end of the day, after all of that back and forth, the confusion, the uncertainty, the jitters for investors, Donald Trump is sticking with his original plan for 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum, which obviously has a massive impact on Canada.
Katie, are you tired? Because I'm tired. You know, we're only a few weeks in this, but it's a lot.
I know, but here's the thing. I sort of have like a serious response to that, because, you know, anytime I think that I'm tired or what is happening here, it's like, what about the auto worker who doesn't know if they're going to have a job? What about the small business owner? Like, so like, of course we're tired. Everyone's tired. Like but like, I always like, anytime I'm like, ugh, it's just like, okay, what about the auto worker who's trying to pay a mortgage? What about the small business owner who doesn't know if they're going to be able to do business with their biggest customers? Like all of that kind of stuff. So anytime we're feeling that, I just like go back to like, we are journalists. It's here to get answers for that kind of thing. You know?
Yeah.
And I know you do too.
It's just like, it's no way to run an economy. It's no way to run a country. It's exhausting. It's overwhelming. And people's lives and fortunes and careers, they're just hanging in the balance here, right? And you know, and relationships and stuff. And, you know, and today he was, again, the president, talking about annexing Canada, right? Here he was, while people are trying to sort out this trade stuff and rebalance things in a way that makes him happy, he's again talking about taking over the country.
And there are two parts to this, David, really right now in this moment. And it started in the White House press briefing room with Caroline Leavitt, who, when was asked about this, she said, I've been doing research and looking into what's going on in Canada and that the cost of living is more expensive. It's higher than down here. And she laid out all of these things about how that are more expensive in Canada and why that should make a good case for Canadians to want to be the 51st state and why Donald Trump believes that is the best sort of thing for Canadians. And then a couple of hours later, Donald Trump had this event where he was promoting Tesla. And again, we could go back to that because that's a whole other thing it is a thing. And Donald Trump laid out what I believe are the most extensive comments he's said publicly about annexing Canada. Have a listen.
So we spend $200 billion a year subsidizing Canada. We don't have to do that. And frankly, the way that gets solved is Canada should honestly become our 51st state. We wouldn't have a northern border problem. We wouldn't have a tariff problem. They don't have much, they spend very little, as you know, the least of almost anybody on military, and we spend the most of anybody on military. We have a great military. I rebuilt the military during my first term. We're going to have to rebuild it a little bit again, not that much, but we're going to have to rebuild it a little bit again. But Canada would be great as our cherished 51st state. You wouldn't have to worry about borders. You wouldn't have to worry about anything.
There is a chance that Donald Trump could say something else. He is at an event right now speaking with business leaders. So perhaps this story changes again between now and the time we go to bed, between now and midnight when the tariffs are supposed to kick in. So honestly, you just don't know. That's just where we are right now in this moment.
Yeah, perhaps. Perhaps. Katie, thank you. That's the CBC's Katie Simpson in Washington. Day 7 of the trade war was headlined by a head-on confrontation between Donald Trump and Doug Ford. Trump started the day by vowing to ruin Canada economically. Retaliation for Ontario putting a 25% surcharge on electricity flowing to the United States. Trump wrote on social media that Canada will pay a financial price for this so big that it will be read about in history books for many years to come. The latest threat was to double looming steel and aluminum tariffs to 50% effective tomorrow. The White House said Ontario was to blame.
The president saw the premier, Doug Ford, make an egregious and insulting comment threatening to shut down electricity for the American people, for hardworking American families. He made that threat. The president saw that and has an obligation and a responsibility to respond accordingly.
Well, the Ontario premier, as the Americans say, didn't back down. And in a series of U.S. cable news interviews, the premier put the blame on the president.
Is it a tool in our toolkit? 100%. And as he continues to hurt Canadian families, Ontario families, I won't hesitate. We will not back down. We will be relentless. I apologize to the American people that President Trump decided to have an unprovoked attack on our country. And if we go into a recession, it's self-made by one person. It's called President Trump's recession. This is absolute chaos created by one person, and that's Donald Trump.
By this afternoon, though, another pause. Ford agreed to suspend his export tax until the Premier and Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc meet with U.S. officials on Thursday in Washington. And even the President is now suggesting that he will back down on his threats.
The Ontario Premier calling you and giving you his decision about the electricity surcharge, and you said you were pleased about that. Will you make a different decision now about the tariffs on Canada? Will you reduce it?
At that, but probably so, yeah. He was a gentleman.
Will you reduce it back?
He was a gentleman.
And then he did. The White House says tariffs on steel and aluminum are back to 25%, claiming the retreat as a victory for the U.S. president. So here we are again, and here's the power panel again to talk about all the chaos again. Emily Nicola is a columnist for Le Devoir. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist and co-host of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. We're hoping to be connecting with Françoise Boivin. Until we do, also here with me in studio is Gary Keller, a former chief of staff to Conservative ministers. Françoise is maybe stuck behind a tariff wall. We're not sure, but we're trying to get her in. Emily, it was quite a day. Do you think Mark Carney still wants this job? I mean, what do you make of what's going on in the developments today with Doug Ford becoming an even bigger player in the Canada-U.S. drama?
I do think Mark Carney wants this job. I do think that the people who decided not to run for the Liberal leadership race are probably happy they didn't run. I also think that what you just said, David, might not be true tomorrow at 9 a.m. and we need to get used to the fact that we don't know what's going on. And the only thing that is the truth that is about to remain is that the president of basically the largest economy in the world has decided to wing it. And the markets are not liking it. And that the Americans are heading into a recession. And that for us in Canada, what that means is that we need to have a leader who is not winging it and who will be having a very clear plan and that this plan needs to be implemented and that there is no way that we can do that without an election. So for me, as far as I'm concerned, everything that is not, can we go into an election and vote for a plan and actually have it and have some stability and visibility on Canada's future for the next 4 years is, we're just basically reacting to the chaos across the border. But really the most urgent thing is that we know what we do and what our own direction for this country is.
Right.
And I think to me, that is the biggest problem.
Yeah, look, Amanda, this is, I raise this point not to argue against an election. I think it's coming next week, and that's fine, off to the races. But can you imagine running an election campaign in the middle of this,
Yes and no. I mean, we just watched Ontario run an election campaign, and Doug Ford sort of played that dual role. So I think it's possible, and I think it's inevitable. So here we are. I mean, it was a completely whiplash day, changing hour by hour. It is unnerving investors. It is stoking fears that the U.S. is in a slowdown, heading into a recession. It is going to hurt the pocketbooks of Americans and Canadian families. And there was a chief economist in the U.S. that called Donald Trump, among many economists that have choice words for Donald Trump, but one of the chief economists said that he is the agent of chaos, and confusion, which is exactly what this feels like. It is changing at such a rapid speed that you really don't know what's going to happen next. And I'm pretty sure that we ended up in the same place this evening as we were at this morning. So despite all of this back and forth, we seem to have arrived at the same place, save for this White House meeting that is now going to be occurring on Thursday. But all of that unpredictability, all of that chaos is sending markets into a tailspin. And it's really, you're starting to believe that all of this chaos and all of this unpredictability that he is seeding feels intentional. And for what end? And that end game, remains a mystery to seemingly everyone.
Yeah, I mean, there is a slight change, Gary, because there is basically a transaction that Doug Ford has suspended the tax in return for the meeting in Washington on Thursday, right? And this is the way this president operates, and we're going to see more of this. But, with the election coming, you've worked on campaigns. You know how scripted and planned they are. I mean, how do you script and plan in this kind of case? I mean, it's tough to govern in a moment like this, let alone, govern and campaign or try to get people to change government and campaign.
Well, I think in a campaign, it doesn't matter what party it is. I think you have to have a plan A and a plan A1. You've got
maybe B, C, D, E, and F in this one. Yeah.
But you got to run your campaign the way you want to run your campaign. It doesn't matter what party it is. But you also have to be prepared to throw that day's agenda and narrative out the window to respond to the day's events. I think this is the Washington whiplash. We've talked about it in previous episodes, and we're going to be talking about it further, I think. This Washington whiplash that we're all going to have to deal with. And for those of us who are trying to analyze the situation on an hour-to-hour basis, I think, it behooves us sometimes to just say, we have to wait till the end of the day to see what the end result is, and we'll pick it up again tomorrow. This is the new world that we're living in.
We can't do that in cable news, Gary.
We can't do that in cable news.
We are on the air all the time. No, I take your point. I take your point.
To Katie's point earlier about she's thinking about the small business person or the steel worker. Like if you follow it hour to hour, it would drive you mad. So you kind of have to insulate yourself, take a step back and analyze where you're at the end of the day. And I think political parties will have to do that.
The problem is hour to hour, right? It jolts the stock market. People lose wealth. Like money, like there's trillions gone in this hour to hour. And like there were layoffs at Algoma today. There was that close down at the aluminum plant in Quebec. It's back on. This is the problem with this whole thing, is that the whims of this guy, it is affecting people's lives, their retirements, their futures, and their mental health on top of their financial health.
Absolutely. It would be really nice if we could find somebody else, another country, to focus on for the next 37 days. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Yeah. But that would be the reality. Is maybe somebody else can come up with a shiny object over here to distract him with another insult or something.
Well, Russia could use some attention. President Trump, if you're watching, just throw that there. Françoise Boivin has entered the chat. She's here. It's good to see you, Françoise. Just your thoughts on this, the ups and downs of today. Like, this was a frantic and frenetic day on the cross-border trade spat. Just your thoughts on where we are at 5:43 p.m. Eastern time. Let's timestamp all of the mistakes.
And little caveat, it might change in the next 10 minutes.
Before your answer ends, perhaps.
Exactly. Before my answer is done, maybe something will completely change. I am, like everybody else, I'm sure, exhausted. I watch the impromptu presser from President Trump, and I'm still to this day, even though I've been studying the guy since the 1980s when I was in negotiation, I'm still amazed that he can almost surprise me day in, day out. I mean, the nonchalant way that he was talking about the markets going up and down, not thinking that there's people who have all of their little money that they save aside that can just go out in smoke in 5 seconds. For me, was shocking while he's buying a Tesla to help the most the richest man in the universe. So that's one thing. You were talking about maybe finding something positive. I had to find myself something positive, or I'll get nuts. And I don't know if you all noticed the same thing, but because of the move from Doug Ford today and what unfolded a bit over there, his tone almost changed a bit toward Canada. So for those who are hoping that he finds a new target, he actually started on Mexico before trashing down Canada, which I think is such an improvement for Canada. It's unbelievable. And he switched right away to the European Union. So there might be hope for us. I say this almost kidding, and I shouldn't kid with a subject like this because so much is at stake. But it just shows how much of a roller coaster this is all about. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump always wins. Even when he loses, basically, he wins. Or you make it sound like he wins.
Yeah, I don't know, Emily, if I find much hope in America deciding that it's also going to try to ruin the economies of Europe and Mexico when like they're trading partners and allies and all of these things. I would find hope in him just stopping, and finding a way to work together on things. But it seems right now, if we have this election next week, the start of it next week or whatever, the voting days we hear are April 28th, May 5th. Those are kind of, when the new government will be picked. In the middle of that is a tariff pause coming off April 2nd, and then other days for other tariffs. I mean, it is just, as Canada's trying to sort out its national level political situation, the economic instability is just going to keep T-boning, the thought process of the voters.
I hear what you're saying. I do think that it means that every political party needs to be focused on a message that is about essentially Canada's resilience. And that's what they're all trying to pivot to, essentially. And it's going to be a matter of choosing what we want to have as a plan for Canada's resilience. And so that's why the day-to-day of Donald Trump wins isn't necessarily changing the key messages. It's more like something that the people who are staying in power need to deal with while also campaigning, but it doesn't change necessarily the campaign, because the campaign itself is already focused on how do we deal with the chaos. And so in that way, that's not my biggest concern. My biggest concern, David, would more be, first of all, foreign interference from the U.S. And I know that's something that I've been nagging people about, but obviously Elon Musk, X, Meta, Twitter, Instagram, the ways in which those platforms can be used to influence votes. Also, everything that has to do with harassment of people in the streets. This is something that we've been concerned with for a really long time. I'm looking forward to see how it plays out in this context. Perhaps that will actually help narrow down the polarization and make it the campaign trail a little bit safer than it would have been otherwise. And so we'll see how that goes. But I think, to me, in terms of campaigning in this environment, foreign interference is the biggest threat, more than actions from the U.S. That is, to me, a separate issue.
Right. Well, look, foreign interference, Amanda, is definitely going to be a thing, from all kinds of actors right now, especially with the U.S. stopping cyber attacks on Russia, that kind of unleashes the bot farms potentially. But there's foreign interference, which is covert. Then there's just the overt stuff, right? I mean, Trump and Musk can put big thumbs on the scales of an election if they so choose to do it in the period of time we're about to enter.
Excuse me, foreign interference and mass disinformation campaigns. and a federal election, which, you know, likely we've never seen anything like it before. It'll be very difficult for parties to be able to focus a clear message and at the same time have voters being absolutely inundated with messages which, you know, maybe a fraction of the truth, a version of the truth. And I think that that is an incredibly challenging way to operate. But I also think that, listen, there is nothing concrete coming out of the US. You know, we said, well, you know, April 2nd is around the corner. So is this a really good time to call an election? April 2nd is around the corner, but an exemption could happen on April 3rd. A pause could happen on April 4th. You know, a new wave of tariffs could come down on April 16th. There is nothing reliable or predictable coming down. So in light of that, I think to Emily's earlier point, we have to be able to get our own house in order, right? I think that obviously Carney, the Liberals require a mandate. The government requires a mandate to deal with not just the current trade war, but the ongoing relationship with Trump, which, you know, if these first 6-7 weeks, whatever we're at, are any indication, we're in for a very long haul of issues to come. And we need, you know, the current government, we need our prime minister to have the mandate to be able to deal with that. And that's why a federal election is so key right now.